Right now, here in Washington, D.C., Congressman Mark Walker of North Carolina, who chairs the Republican Study Committee. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Maria. It's a pleasure.
Your reaction to these results?
Well, I don't think it's very much of a surprise. What we believe, this is more of a referendum on Mitch McConnell and the Senate's inability to be able to perform specifically on the major items that we've promised the American people for the last few years. Somebody says, what does this look like to Donald Trump? I don't think it sticks to the president at all, but I do believe it's another shout out, another call to action on the Senate, specifically Mitch McConnell.
But what do you think Roy Moore will bring to the table when it comes to policy decisions, when it comes to things like tax reform, health care? That
remains to be seen. I think we live in a culture sometimes that we continue to raise the bar of what exactly a conservative or how it's defined. We also have to remember that the effective conservative is a huge component of this, not just being conservative. If your policy never reaches the audience's ear, you have to ask yourself, what good is that policy?
Matt.
Yeah, and the other thing about Alabama, which is interesting, is that there was a little bit of a corrupt bargain with Roy Moore kind of, giving a nice cover to the former governor who got himself in trouble. Yep. People are just done with those kind of bargains, Agreed. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. They want somebody they feel like is authentic, whether they say it right or whether they have much couth or not. But to Maria's question, that remains to be seen. Can you come in and bring those values that you aspire to and turn them into a way to effectively be a legislator?
Congressman, I want to ask you about the tax plan that's coming out today. Sure. We were just talking about this uncertainty about where the top rate is going to be. Can you get yourself and your group behind a plan that doesn't lower the top rate to some level below 39.6?
I think we can, and here's why. If we look at the last few months with the border adjustment tax being pulled out, we have $980 billion of Obamacare taxes that we're hoping to include in this whole reform package, relief package. Because those two things are off the table, I believe we have to look at specifically primary focusing on the middle class tax relief and then work our way to making sure that everybody gets an opportunity, even the upper brackets. But our focus should be on the middle class. The other component I would put to this, it really removes the main talking point from the left, from our Democrat friends who want to make the case that we're only concerned about giving the rich more tax breaks.
So did you get bullied again? You got bullied by the left.
Well, I don't know if we'd put it specifically in that component, but I think if you have to prioritize and you only have so much money, who gets the first tax break or tax relief first? It should be the middle class.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But Dagan, you and I have spoken 100 times about who pays all the taxes. So when you look at actually the highest earners, that's really where the tax revenue is coming. So, right. I mean, what I've said in the past, Dagan, is, if you don't cut taxes on the highest earning, are you really cutting taxes?
Right. This is, quite frankly, a Republican. I want to point out that nearly half of Americans in this country pay no net federal income tax. And this is the right giving in to the argument that somehow wealth is evil and that riches are evil and that people who make north of $500,000 a year don't benefit the economy and they don't deserve a tax break. And then again, it's the redistribution of wealth, where you're going to tax potentially people in who make a lot of money in this country, even more money to give people a break who already don't pay income taxes.
Bingo.
Yeah, well,
what do you say to that?
Listen, Dagan's a rock star. I don't want to push back too much, and I believe the number is that the top 1% pay 24% of the taxes. Yes, we have to make.
Well, the top 1%. What about the top 10%?
Well, the top 10%.
Is it 70%?
It could be that much.
I think so. It's 70%.
And we've got to continue. Obviously, we've got to continue to make sure that these tax breaks go across everybody who is paying taxes. But if you have a certain amount of money without pushing things further into debt, and you have to make a decision because you didn't get the border adjustment tax as part of this, because you didn't repeal the $980 billion worth of Obamacare taxes, you may have to do it in stages as opposed to all at once.
Yeah, you make a good point, because the question ultimately comes up, how are you going to pay for this? And that's where we are.
Right, and so there's $1.5 trillion that the party has to work with, and as the congressman says, you've got to figure out how you're going to divvy that up. So let's talk about some of these pay-fors, as you say. State and local tax deduction, is that going to go away? Corporate interest deduction, is that going to go away? What's going to go away in this? Where's the reform part of this reform plan?
Well, we hope the reform components manifest itself into everyday life for the middle class. class, specifically having more opportunities to take your family out to eat. It may be an additional car payment. Those are the kinds of tangible benefits that we want to see. When it comes to specifically what you're talking about, state and local taxes, I don't believe that we're going to delve into the components that make any kind of impact on the state and local. I think this is completely from a federal perspective. When it comes to other places to reform, we want to make sure that people obviously have a deductions when it comes to higher education, when it comes to mortgage interest deductions. That's the first step in American dream.
Are you saying you don't want to get rid of the state and local deductions?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, North Carolina is kind of the benchmark when it comes to reducing the state and local taxes. Our state Senate there has continued to reduce in the last 5 or 6 years, only to see our economy continue to boom. In fact, some of those areas were leading the entire country.
But this is a deduction. Are you saying you want to keep the deduction in place in the federal tax code? Or
would you want to eliminate it?
Listen, if I had to choose right now, I'd love to eliminate it. No question about it. But we've got to make sure today we'll be in a mini retreat to kind of hash some of this stuff out. I don't want to be premature to kind of lay out until we hear from Kevin Brady from the Ways and Means to specifically lay into what his plan is.
And what about the deficit? $1.5 trillion is the number coming out of the Senate. Is that a number you're comfortable with?
No, it's not. No, we're not comfortable with that at all. That's why we've got to make sure when we put these numbers into the big mashup, we've got to make sure that it doesn't add continued more to the debt. We've got to make sure that this breaks down where the revenues are not depleted to the place that we're only robbing Peter to pay Paul.
You don't want any deficit over 10 years.
That's correct. Yes, and that's why we have even the R-N.C. Our budget balances in 10 years.
So you do want this revenue neutral then?
Absolutely.
Let me ask you about one of the most powerful lobbying groups out there. That's the real estate lobbying group, obviously, and there's a concern about carried interest. Is there anything being done there? No, not that I know of. Now, today, when we unveil some of the details, when Kevin Brady kind of, for the first time, gives us more than just the framework, we will know more information, but at this point, I have not heard of that. Let's talk about Obamacare for a moment. Dagan, I want to get you in here because Republican efforts to repeal Obamacare obviously officially on ice after Senate leaders conceded they would not be moving ahead with this repeal bill sponsored by Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy. The decision coming less than 24 hours after a pivotal Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine declared her opposition to the proposal, and yet Senate Republicans are insisting this fight is not over. Listen, got to get your reaction.
To my Republican colleagues, we're going to fulfill our promise to repeal and replace. To the American people, we're going to improve health care for you, because at the end of the day, that's the only promise that matters.
We haven't given up on changing the American health care system. We are not going to be able to do that this week, but it still lies ahead of us, and we haven't given up on that. We do think it's time to turn to our twin priority, reforming the tax code.
So Obamacare remains the law of the land. Congressman, do you believe that we will see a change at some point? What's the plan?
I believe so. It was interesting to listen to the language that Lindsey used, Lindsey Graham versus Mitch McConnell. Lindsey talked about repeal. Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, talked about improving the health care system. So two different contrasts. The position with 160 members in the R-N.C. with 17 of the 20 chairmen, we are committed to continuing to repeal. The reason why, North Carolina, without going to the talking points, 94 of 100 of our counties are down to only one insurance option.
Incredible.
The premiums continue to rise. This is not something that we can look the other way on. We must stay focused on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this question about Republicans not fulfilling their promise for 7.5 years to repeal and replace Obamacare, I think that's a little bit about what happened in Alabama last night. Like you said, when we're not fulfilling these promises, there's big trouble.
That's a good point. Congressman, it's good to see you.
Thank you, Maria.
Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Congressman Mark Walker joining us there.